let's get started.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us as we share information on the City of Austin's Small Business Relief Grant. My name is Chris Schreck, and want to thank you for your attendance and participation in this webinar. The city has been really working diligently to launch relief programs across a number of different populations as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the City of Austin is hosting this webinar alongside our partners, the Better Business Bureau, who is the grant administrator for the Austin Small Business Relief Grant. That I will turn this over to the Better Business Bureau to kick off the webinar.
All right, thanks, Chris. My name is Sarah Smock, and as he said, I'm from Better Business Bureau, commonly known as BBB. And before I go through an agenda with you, I want to share a little bit about the fund and some housekeeping items. So the dollars available through the program were provided to the City of Austin through the Federal CARES Act, and the Austin City Council and the City of Austin Economic Development Department partnered with BBB to distribute the funds. So our team at BBB works with small businesses and nonprofits day in and day out, which makes us a natural fit for helping the city with the task of reviewing applications. And we're excited to help with this program and give you a small taste of BBB's commitment to small businesses and nonprofits. There are a few housekeeping items to cover so that everyone understands how the webinar will work. To cut down on noise, we're muting the attendees during the webinar, but you can submit questions via the online chat, and we'll try to answer directly in the chat or at the end of the webinar. There's also a list of FAQs on the atxrecovers.org website, so that will be a good resource for you after the webinar. Additionally, a recording of the webinar will be posted on that same website tomorrow. Before we get to, let me go on to the agenda. We're going to talk during this webinar about an overview of the program, the eligibility requirements, what expenses are eligible as well as ineligible, what the application process looks like, and the evaluation criteria and questions at the end. On the program itself, the city received $16.5 million from the Federal CARES Act to fund help for local small businesses. And an additional $1 million has been allocated to reimburse small businesses for the cost of personal protective equipment and workplace safety enhancements. Through this federally funded program, $16.5 million can be awarded in grants of up to $40,000 per small business. And just to be clear, these are grants and will not need to be repaid. The application window opened yesterday and will run through July 24th. Next, I'm going to share some information about eligibility and what would make an entity ineligible. So eligible business applicants must meet the following conditions. They need to be headquartered in the City of Austin, specifically within a full purpose jurisdiction. They have to have 25 or fewer full-time equivalent employees, under $5 million in annual revenue, organized as a partnership, LLC, sole proprietorship, etc., in operation for at least 2 years, able to provide 1 year of federal income tax returns, and able to demonstrate a direct financial loss associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Not every small business will qualify for a grant, so let me share some things that will render a business ineligible. Being disbarred from contracting with the federal government, lack of an employer identification number, engaged in multi-level marketing, deriving more than 1/3 of its income from gambling activities, engaged primarily in lobbying, houses of worship or other religious entities, nonprofits, and individuals. So I will note that nonprofit organizations can apply to the Austin Nonprofit Relief Grant Program, and individuals can apply to the RISE program. Businesses applying for a grant need to be aware of the eligible and ineligible expenses. So grant amounts to qualifying applicants will be calculated based on a business's ability to document expenses eligible for reimbursement. Expenses must have been incurred between March 1st, 2020 and July 7th, 2020. Successful applicants may receive up to $40,000 by documenting expenditures made in the following categories: payroll and employee retention, rent or mortgage for the business, and note that this can be a deferred payment if there's proof of a payment that was due during the eligible period of March 1st to July 7th. But any rent or mortgage payments during that period that were forgiven or not required to be paid at a future date are not eligible for reimbursement. Other eligible expenses: COVID-19 facility modifications, personal protective equipment, sanitation and cleaning, property purchased for an existing business, inventory, business insurance, technology, worker training, response and adaptation to the pandemic, and modifications made to enhance public safety and health standards. Some expenses that aren't eligible include lost sales, donations, or sponsorships, merchandise sold for marketing purposes, costs incurred before March 1st of 2020, and costs paid for by other CARES Act grants or loans, such as the Paycheck Protection Program or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. So next, we'll talk a bit about the application process itself. First, individual applicants may only apply for one business, even if he or she owns more than one business. Applicants can apply for up to $40,000 for reimbursement of expenses occurring between March 1st and July 7th, 2020. They must be able to provide proof of those eligible expenses. Applicants must also make a commitment to keep their business open and retain their employees to the best of their ability. And applicants also are encouraged to participate in technical assistance. There is required documentation as well. So you'll want to gather these things before beginning the application: proof of expenses eligible for reimbursement, documentation of COVID-19 related economic loss, current balance sheet and profit and loss statement, payroll records, including the number of employees, keeping in mind that it's full-time equivalent employees, most recent federal tax return or proof of a 2019 extension if providing the 2018 return, and proof of registration with the Secretary of State or County Clerk. Since the available grant money is limited, the city created a scoring criteria that BBB will utilize in awarding the funds. The city provided BBB with this criteria, and every application will be evaluated against a scoring matrix that includes criteria for need, vulnerability, and equity. For distributions of funds, 50% of the program funding will be allocated to applicants that score the highest according to the matrix, and the remaining 50% will be awarded by a random lottery among eligible applicants. Businesses managed by or serving historically marginalized communities are especially encouraged to apply. So the criteria includes years in business, race and ethnicity of owners, gender of owners or board members, location in a low or moderate income area, the number of employees, ability to operate during stay-at-home orders, annual revenue, COVID-19 adaptation costs, available working capital, and the likely consequence of not receiving funds. And the remaining 50% of funds that will be awarded by the random lottery, this allows the city to offer a fair system and access to a program that has high volume of interest. It provides a fair system to manage access and ensure equitable participation. So the review process and what applicants expect is next. So first, BBB will evaluate applicants based on the objective criteria as they are received. Half of the grants will be awarded on a competitive basis with priority given to those with critical needs. And because these are competitive, when the money runs out, there will be no additional funds beyond those that will be awarded via the lottery. And the half awarded through the random lottery will include all the eligible businesses and will take place after the application deadline on July 24th. If a business is awarded a grant, BBB will send funds directly to the organization. Our goal is to provide feedback on applications within 10 business days. However, the response time could be higher if the volume of applications is higher than anticipated. Additionally, it could be slowed if we have to go back to applicants who don't provide necessary information. Payments will be sent after the application period closes. And as a reminder, the City of Austin is striving to provide these grants to organizations run by and serving members of historically underrepresented communities. Therefore, we want to strongly encourage businesses meeting that criteria to apply. We also wanted to share what those who apply could expect. Once an application has been submitted, the applicant will receive a confirmation email. And you'll also have the ability to work on your application in stages, meaning that you can save progress and come back to it. BBB intends to notify applicants of questions or the need for further documentation within 10 business days of receiving an application. And as a reminder, again, the application period started yesterday, July 7th at 10 a.m. and will run through July 24th at 5 p.m. Before we open it up for questions, I wanted to provide a few key points for you to be aware of. Everything you need to get started and submit your application can be found at www.atxrecovers.com. In addition to the application link, you'll also find frequently asked questions, a downloadable checklist, and webinar recordings. Should you have questions about eligibility, your application, etc., you can also contact BBB at 512-318-2683 or email us at businessreliefgrant@austin.bbb.org. We are here to help. And with that, we'll start answering your questions. So again, feel free to continue submitting them via chat. We'll answer as many as we can during the time that we have allotted until 11 a.m. And we will also be adding frequently to the FAQs on the ATX Recovers website. You can also, again, especially if your situation is somewhat unique, you can always call or email us with your question as well. And with that, I'm going to invite the representatives from the city to start answering questions.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I think maybe the easiest thing to do is we've been trying to keep up with some questions in the chat as they go through, or as they come in. And so I'm just going to work my way through here and try to tackle some of the ones that I haven't seen answered yet. Are owner salaries paid as guaranteed payments considered part of payroll? The program is not necessarily distinguishing between employee salaries and owner salaries, if you can document that as an eligible expense. Are interest payments on business loans eligible? This is a good question. I am going to double check on the answer to this and follow up. One of the things that we are working on is sort of adding an extensive list of FAQs to the program websites themselves. And so this is a question that we haven't gotten yet. And so I want to double check that I can answer that correctly. And then we will get that uploaded to the FAQ section as well. If our business is under 2 years old, we would not qualify. The minimum eligibility criteria is continuous operation for 2 years. Let's see, and so we applied for the Creative Space Disaster Relief Fund. Can we also apply for the Small Business Relief Grant funding? The answer to that is yes. So the primary sort of eligibility constraint in terms of expenses in this program is because this is funding provided by the Coronavirus Relief Fund through the CARES Act, we can't reimburse for any expenses that were already paid for out of other federal funds. However, the Creative Spaces Disaster Relief Fund is a different source of funds, and so we can allow folks to apply for both of those programs. If the only sort of expectation, I think this was alluded to in Sarah's presentation as well, is that if you used either the Paycheck Protection Program or the EIDL loan from SBA to pay for certain expenses, we can't reimburse for those through this program. Does not allowing loss of revenues from donations also apply to nonprofits? This is, I think there are also some specific some specific webinars scheduled for the Nonprofit Relief Grant Program. I'm not 100% sure on the answer to that question for the Nonprofit Relief Program, but I would encourage Steve attending one of the Nonprofit Relief Grant webinars to ask specific questions about the eligibility criteria for that program.
And the first one of those is at 1:30 this afternoon.
Thanks, Sarah. Does payroll include employer paid insurance and other employee benefits? Another good question. Let me also double check on that. What are some examples of documentation of COVID-19 related loss? I think one of the things that we wanted to do with this grant program was to make it as accessible as possible to businesses. We know that the need is really great, and so I think we're wanting to be pretty flexible in terms of what we can sort of perceive as COVID-19 related loss. I think if you can show, for example, cancellation of events, or revenue declines over time, or that you were a landlord that is no longer receiving payments from folks, or you paid down payments on sort of equipment rentals that then you couldn't use. A lot of these things are kind of what we're looking for in terms of how your business has been negatively impacted by COVID-19. I suspect that for the vast majority of folks on this webinar, documenting how the pandemic has been harmful on their businesses is not, I suppose I should say the vast majority of folks, I think, have experienced hardship as a result of the pandemic. And we're just asking for kind of some documentation that illustrates what that looks like for your specific business. how many hours signifies someone as an FTE? So we're treating all part-time employees, those who are less than 40 hours a week, as half an FTE for the purposes of calculating the 25 FTEs for the eligibility requirement. Kareem, with respect to the question about back-owed rent and the CSAP program, let's follow up individually on that one in terms of how the specific kind of intricacies of how the CSAP program and this program might operate together. I think that's kind of a one-off case. I think either we can work through the Better Business Bureau here, who have some case managers set up to assist with these kinds of questions. And we can also, if you're connected to our music program for the CSAP program, we can make that connection as well. Is a sole proprietor considered an individual and need to apply to the RISE program? This comes down to sort of ability to provide sort of the required documentation for the program. And so if you are a sole proprietorship who has sort of registered as a business entity and can provide all the other kind of required documentation, then you are encouraged to apply for this program. If you are operating as an individual, and can't provide the required documentation for this program, you might check out the RISE program as an option. What if we were able to pay rent, but COVID has slowed work so much since March that the coming months are going to suffer due to that work stopping? So ability to pay rent or not pay rent isn't necessarily a criteria for this program. So I think what we're asking is for businesses to document the payments that they were making during this time, during March 1st to July 7th. And if selected for an award, it's those payments that were made that calculate what we can sort of reimburse for through the grant. And so in this instance, I would say as you're filling out the application, those rent payments are eligible expenses for reimbursement. And then if selected for an award, that reimbursement could then be used for future rent payments by you if sort of work is slowing and need is and you need to use it in that way. Will there be other lower amounts awarded if not the full 40K? So our ability to make an award is a function of each application's sort of documented expenses between March 1st and July 7th. And so the way that we are structuring this grant is that the applicants are requested to provide sort of documentation of what eligible expenses they made in that time period. And then we, if selected for an award, we then go and provide a grant amount equal to those documented eligible expenses. So if a business doesn't have sort of $40,000 worth of documented expenses, but they are selected for an award, their award amount would be less than that full 40K. Will the application allow for uploading of documents? Yes. So the way the application is structured is it's an online form. You are able to create a login and save the form, and so you can save your progress as you're going through it. And then yes, it's a one-step application. So everything you need to do in terms of uploading documents and all that is right there. And it should be all sort of completed in one stop, though. If you need to take a break to collect things or something like that, you can save your progress and come back to it later. What does full purpose jurisdiction mean? Basically, it just means if you are located in a city council district for the city of Austin, it's basically referring to jurisdiction, the area of land that falls within the city of Austin's sort of legal sort of management or jurisdiction to operate. What payroll timeframe is used to determine FTE count? The sort of time that is used to determine eligibility for FTEs is how many FTEs did you have on March 1st, 2020? Steve Amos asks if there's a video session for nonprofits. Sarah mentioned that there are webinars scheduled for that, and the first one is at 1:30 today.
Yes, 1:30 for the nonprofit.
I received an EIDL loan, but haven't yet allocated any of it. Does this complicate eligibility for this City of Austin grant? This is a really good question. We will definitely treat this in the FAQs that get updated either today or tomorrow. And I think, as Sarah mentioned, one of the things that is important about this is that it's not a first come, first served grant. And so there's still 3 weeks left in this application window. And we will get back to folks quickly about these particularly good questions in the FAQs and still leave you plenty of time to submit an application. Startup technology so the question is, do startup technology companies qualify for this program? If a technology company meets the other eligibility criteria in that they have fewer than 25 FTEs, they have less than 5 million in annual revenues, they've been in operation for at least 2 years, there's nothing that specifically would exclude a startup technology company from applying for the grant, so long as they meet the other eligibility criteria. Deborah Wisman asks, I am the director of a half-day licensed childcare nonprofit preschool located at a church. We have a separate tax identification number and pay rent to the church. Would we qualify for the nonprofit grant? And will there be a webinar related to the nonprofit grant? Deborah, I would just suggest that that you reach out to BBB regarding sort of the specifics of your sort of operational eligibility. And then, as we mentioned, there are some nonprofit related grants coming up too. Folks who have been monitoring the chat, have we addressed a lot of the ones that have been asked at this point, or should I keep going?
Chris, this is Nicole, also from the city. There are a few questions in here that I'm still responding to, and also some that we will need to respond to after we gain clarification.
Okay.
There's a question right now, where on the website are eligibility requirements posted? I will put the link also in this chat right now. For the nonprofit questions, also the chat for that eligibility requirement is also in the chat. Barbara, for your comments on daycares, grants for daycares, we anticipate that program to be open in the next 2 weeks.
Looking at Rick Lacey's question about payroll reports on QuickBooks. I would say this sort of documentation is relevant to how many employees or FTEs did you have on March 1st? And so that one payroll, if you have a payroll record that sort of documents that, that's helpful. And then B, are you claiming payroll as an expense that you would like reimbursement for, in which case the documentation needs to support what you're asking for there. And again, if you have sort of specific questions like that about how to complete the application, there are folks at BBB who can sort of help answer those questions as well. I encourage you to reach out. Independent contractors do not count as FTEs as part of your FTE count. Another one of the questions that I'm seeing pop up a couple of times. If I'm a woman-owned business but have not registered as such up until now, would that still be considered in the evaluation? Yes, it's not necessary that you register as a woman-owned business. It is the question just asks if you are a woman-owned business.
There's a question also about, are we aware of any programs for businesses under 2 years in operation? I have put into the chat the ATX Recover site there. We are not aware of any other programs at the city level that would assist that, but there may be other resources to state, county, and federal resources available on that page.
There are a couple of questions just about documentation. As a general practice, I'd say be in touch with the Better Business Bureau folks about any specific documentation questions. One I'm seeing is, if you've not filed your 2019 tax return yet, may we submit our 2018 return? The answer to that is yes. And then, is a financial statement through May 2020 sufficient? And the answer to that is just sort of yes. And then also, depending on, in terms of what's required for the required documentation, yes, that's sufficient. If you are using that documentation as justification for any expenses that you would like reimbursement for, it just has to be reflected in the documentation that you are submitting there.
One, Chris, that somebody was asking about what the city meant by saying that businesses are encouraged to participate in technical, I think it was phrased as technical support. Maybe? Yeah,
so we do have, for this program, a number of different organizations who can provide support or answer questions on applications. From our perspective, we want to see folks apply to the program and receive funding, and we also want people to know that there is assistance to help them with the application if they need it. And so, in addition to the Better Business Bureau, who has a number of folks sort of dedicated to help folks with application questions, we've also contracted with People Fund, the Austin Independent Business Association, and the Austin Revitalization Authority, each of whom have offered to provide kind of support to applicants for this program if they need help with sort of documentation or other assistance with filling out the application itself. And so would encourage folks to sort of avail themselves of those opportunities as well if any additional kind of support for the application itself is needed. Having received technical assistance in that way doesn't factor into like whether or not you are more likely to get a grant award in any specific way. We just want to make sure that everybody knows that assistance is there if needed. Apologies, still working through some of these questions in the chat. It looks like most of these have been either responded to in the chat, or I think there are a few that are quite good questions that we'll need to double check on and then provide as responses in the formal FAQ on the website itself. That FAQ is available at the link that Nicole provided in this chat. You can also get there by going to atxrecovers.com and clicking on the Austin Small Business Relief Grant. And we will update that. And again, if you have additional questions about this, you are encouraged to reach out to either the Better Business Bureau or any of the kind of community organizations that are happy to provide support as well. And those are the People Fund, the Austin Independent Business Association Alliance, excuse me, and the Austin Revitalization Authority. Any other sort of thoughts or closing remarks from either other City of Austin staff or the Austin Better Business Bureau?
No, thank you, Chris. This is Nicole. I would say, so we can honor the time that we committed to the webinar. I think what would be best is you all can keep posting items in the chat and we will keep responding to them. Some of these we may not be able to respond to. We'll close the webinar at 11 a.m. And then questions that are outstanding, we will follow up with. We have several other webinars scheduled. If there's a question on here that you did not receive an answer to, we encourage you to contact the Better Business Bureau. And then between now and 11, we will work diligently in the chat to respond to the questions that we can, and what we cannot, we will circle back with and post the responses onto our website. Thank you.